The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. In the following weeks, the Allied authorities recorded the surrender of exactly 156 German U-boats. Those submarines surfaced in ports from Norway to Gibraltar, their crews lined up on deck, hands raised, black, white, red naval ensigns lowered for the last time. The numbers were precise, bureaucratic, final. Yet when the Kriegsmarine's own secret fleet list was finally compared with the Allied tally, 54 boats were simply missing. Not sunk, their wrecks had been accounted for. Not scuttled in deep water with conclusive evidence. Not captured at sea. 54 modern submarines. Many of them the revolutionary type XXI, Electroboot, capable of 17 knots submerged, had vanished as completely as their commanders had promised they would never surrender. For men and women who remember the war, who queued for rations in 1945, who heard the church bells ring when the news of peace broke, the idea that part of Hitler's navy simply refused to accept defeat still carries an almost supernatural chill. These are not obsolete coastal boats. These were the pride of Admiral Donat's fleet, crewed by fanatics who had been told since 1944 that a final redoubt awaited them overseas. Donat himself, in his last radio message as Führer on May 1, 1945, spoke of preserving the nucleus of the movement and safely transporting it to distant bases. Many old sailors who heard that broadcast in Wilhelmshaven or Brest still remember the exact words, because they knew what the Grand Admiral really meant. The disappearances began immediately. On May 10, 1945, U-530, a long-range Type XE/40, slipped out of Kristiansand in Norway under Captain Lieutenant Otto Wermuth. She was supposed to sail to a surrender port. Instead, she vanished for 71 days. When she finally surfaced off Mar del Plata, Argentina, on July 10th, her crew looked strangely healthy, almost rested. They had no torpedoes left, no log for the last 2 months, and most curious of all, the boat's deck gun and anti-aircraft weapons had been removed at sea, something that requires calm weather and several days of work. The Argentine naval officers who boarded her noticed the bilges had been scrubbed with unusual thoroughness, as if someone wanted no trace of a previous cargo. 3 weeks later, on August 17th, a second boat appeared at the same River Plate estuary, U-977, commanded by Oberleutnant Heinz Schaefer. She had taken 84 days to cross the Atlantic submerged for most of the journey on her snorkel, burning battery power at a rate that should have been impossible without recharging in some hidden cove. The young crew looked tanned, not pale from months underwater. When Allied interrogators pressed Schaefer, he gave the same calm answer again and again. We simply wanted to start new lives in South America. Nothing more. Yet the boat's secret safe was empty, its code books burned, and the rubber dinghies were missing, boats normally kept for emergency evacuation. These 2 arrivals were only the ones that chose to surface. Argentine fishermen along the deserted beaches of Patagonia told different stories in the late summer of 1945. Old men who still worked the nets near Caleta de los Loros remembered nights when powerful diesel engines could be heard far out at sea, engines that stopped suddenly as if the boats had dived. Some claimed to have seen gray shapes gliding past under the moon, running without lights. One elderly lobsterman, Don Segundo Mendoza, swore that in August 1945 a submarine surfaced close to his boat at dawn, and uniformed men asked in perfect Spanish for fresh water and fruit. They paid with gold 20-peso coins bearing the date 1943, coins that should never have left Germany. When he told the authorities, naval intelligence officers visited his hut the next day and warned him to keep quiet for the sake of peace. Further north, near the little port of Necochea, children playing on the dunes in 1947 found a strange metal cylinder half buried in the sand. It contained German naval charts of the South Atlantic annotated in pencil with dates in June and July 1945, and a single line in Gothic script, Für den Führer und das Reich, or far and wider for the Führer and the Reich. We sail on. The cylinder vanished from the local police station the same night it was handed in. In Spain, the picture was quieter, but no less strange. Neutral Franco had allowed German supply ships and agents to operate from Vigo, and cutters throughout the war. In the last week of April 1945, the Spanish Admiralty logged an unusual number of ghost contacts on the Galician coast. Large submarines running submerged by day, surfacing only after dark. Fishermen from El Ferrol spoke of seeing men in unfamiliar gray uniforms coming ashore in rubber boats to a lonely beach called Playa de Lax. They carried heavy crates up the cliffs to waiting trucks. The local civil guard looked the other way. Some said the officers had been paid in Swiss francs. Even farther afield, there were whispers. In March 1946, a Norwegian whaling factory ship in the Antarctic reported a brief radio telephone contact with a German-speaking operator who gave the call sign U- before breaking off. The position was close to the band quadrant around the German 1939 base in Queen Maud Land. The whalers were ordered by British authorities never to mention it again. But the most unsettling evidence remained classified for 78 years. In 2023, the United States Navy, under pressure from persistent Freedom of Information requests, released a thick folder marked ONI Report 1945 to 1955 Unaccounted Kriegsmarine U-Craft. The documents inside, written by the same officers who once hunted the wolf packs, are written in the dry language of intelligence analysts. Yet even now they raise the hair on the back of the neck. The report lists 54 missing boats by hull number. Next to 21 of them, someone has written in pencil the single word Argentina with a question mark. Next to 11 others, Spain/Atlantic Islands. 3 are annotated Nordmeer route, possible Norway to Japan attempt. 1 entry U-3523, a brand new Type XXI sunk officially by a British frigate on May 6, 1945, has a later handwritten note. Wreck Survey, 2001. No evidence of torpedo damage. Possible stage scuttling. The ONI analysts concluded already in 1950 that at least 30 of the missing boats had probably reached South America and that high-value passengers and technical materials had likely been transferred ashore. They recommended continued aerial surveillance of the Patagonian fjords for an indefinite period. The surveillance continued, in fact, until the late 1970s. Tonight, 80 years later, elderly men and women who lived through those days still ask the same question over coffee in Hamburg or Buenos Aires. What exactly arrived on those deserted beaches in the winter of 1945? And why? After all these years, do some stretches of the Argentine coast still yield the occasional gray-painted steel plate with a faded Bockenkreuz when storms shift the dunes? In the next part, we will sail with U-530 and U-977 on their impossible voyages, read the private diaries of their young crew members, and examine the first testimonies of the Argentine fishermen who met ghosts in the fog. The voyage of U-530 began in horror and ended in silence. Otto Wermuth was only 31, a quiet Westphalian who had already survived 3 war patrols and the loss of his elder brother on U-68. When the ceasefire order reached Christiansand on May 8, 1945, his crew expected to steam into a British port and be taken prisoner like the others. Instead, at 3:14 on May 10th, Wermuth gathered the men in the control room, closed the hatch, and spoke the words none of them would ever write down in an official report. "We are not finished," he said. "The Grand Admiral has given us a last mission. We sail south. No surrender. No logs after this night." The diesel mechanic, Obermaskinist Hans-Joachim Krug, was 68 when he finally spoke to an Argentine journalist in 1993. By then his hands shook with Parkinson's, but the memory was sharp. "We threw the code books overboard that same morning," he recalled. "Then we removed the 10.5 centimeters deck gun and both 20 millimeters flak guns. It took 4 days of calm weather off the Shetlands. We worked in swimming trunks, so the lookouts would spot aircraft sooner. The barrels went over the side chained to depth charges set for 200 meters. The noise when they imploded, I still hear it. They ran south on the surface at night, hugging the coast of neutral Ireland, then dived deep when the first Sunderland flying boat appeared. For 66 days they lived on tinned sausage, hard bread, and condensed milk. The air grew foul. The men grew beards. Yet when U-530 finally surfaced in the outer roads of Mar del Plata on the morning of July 10th, the Argentine harbor pilot was astonished at how clean the crew looked. Their uniforms were freshly pressed, shoes polished. Someone had found time to shave 69 men with 1 bucket of fresh water. The official Argentine report noted something else. The boat's torpedo tubes were empty, but the bilges contained traces of gold leaf and a sweet smell the chemists could not identify. When the Americans arrived to interrogate Wermuth, he answered every question with polite calm except one. Asked where he had obtained fresh fruit during a 71-day submerged passage, he smiled and said, "The sea provides for those who know where to ask." U-977's journey was even more improbable. Heinz Schaefer was 24, the youngest U-boat commander of the war. His boat left Christiansand on May 2nd, 6 days before the surrender, officially on a weather reporting mission to the North Atlantic. Instead, Schaefer steered west of Ireland, then south past the Azores, running almost the entire distance on snorkel. 84 days with the periscope barely breaking the surface. The battery plates should have been ruined, the air unbreathable. Yet when U-977 surfaced off Mar del Plata on August 17th, the medical officer who examined the crew wrote in his private diary, "These men are sunburned. Some have tan lines from wristwatches." Explained that after 3 months underwater. Schaefer kept his own small notebook, hidden inside the lining of his sea jacket. After his death in 1994, his daughter found it sewn into the collar. The entries are brief, almost telegraphic, but they tell a different story from the one he gave the Allies. June 5, 1945, took aboard 3 passengers at 46 degrees, 50 minutes north, 20 degrees, 10 minutes west. Civilians in leather coats. No names. Heavy boxes. Gold seals. June 12th, stopped engines for 6 hours. Passengers went ashore in dinghy to island. Returned without boxes. Gave us oranges and a goat. June 29th, crossed equator. Crew sing old songs. Passengers stayed below. One speaks Spanish like a Madrileno. July 14th. Passengers left at night near deserted beach. Dinghy returned empty. We burned the flag. The coordinates 46 degrees, 50 minutes north, 20 degrees, 10 minutes west placed the rendezvous 400 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands, in an empty stretch of ocean. There are no islands there, only the drowned peaks of the mid-Atlantic ridge. Yet Argentine Naval Archives, released in 2018, contain a report from a fishing trawler out of Dakar that on June 4th, 1945 was stopped by a gray submarine that took on water and provisions. The skipper was paid with a gold Krugerrand and told, in perfect French, "You never saw us." In Patagonia, the old fishermen still remember the summer of 1945 as the year of the silent boats. Don Antonio Ramirez, 92 when I spoke to him in 2019, lived in a small house above the beach at Playa Union. He kept a rusted Wehrmacht belt buckle in a tin box on his mantelpiece. "I was 20 then," he told me. "One night in late July, my father and I were mending nets when we heard engines, very quiet, not like the fishing boats. A big submarine came in close, maybe 200 meters. No lights. Men came ashore in a rubber boat, 6 or 7. Tall, very blonde. They asked for water and firewood. Paid with German money, silver coins with the eagle. My father was afraid, but they were polite. One officer spoke Spanish. He said they were going to the end of the world and could not stop long. Before they left, they gave us a bottle of schnapps and a photograph. I still have it. The photograph shows 7 young men in gray uniforms standing beside a conning tower. The number on the tower has been carefully scratched out, but the shape of the Wintergarten and the snorkel mast identifies a Type 9 boat. On the back, someone wrote in pencil, "For Argentinian, July 1945. Further south, near San Antonio Oeste, an elderly shepherd named Eusebio Huenchuel found something in 1951 that still troubles his sleep. While searching for lost sheep after a storm, he came across a wooden crate half buried in the dunes. Inside were 24 sealed glass tubes, each containing a yellowish powder. A label in German read, Praparat 46, nerve for transport. He took 1 tube home. Years later, when the Americans came asking questions in the 1960s, they took the tube and gave him $100 and a warning never to speak of it. The other 23 tubes were gone, dug up during the night. The American naval attaché in Buenos Aires, Captain Alan F. Rockwell, wrote a confidential memorandum on August 22, 1945 that remained classified until 2023. It reads, in part, local sources report at least 8 separate U-boat landings between Necochea and Comodoro Rivadavia since mid-June. In every case, the boats remain only a few hours, take on water and fresh food, and depart before dawn. Crews appeared disciplined and in good health. Several witnesses described civilians in long coats accompanying the naval personnel. Payments are invariably in pre-war gold coins or Swiss francs. The Argentine Navy has been instructed at the highest level to treat these incidents as routine smuggling and not to investigate. Rockwell ended the memo with a handwritten note. Someone very important is being brought in, and someone even more important does not want us to know who. In the next part, we will follow the trail into the icy fjords of Patagonia, meet the German-speaking colonies that were waiting, and examine the declassified 2023 ONI photographs of submarine pins carved into cliffs that officially do not exist. The coastline south of Comodoro Rivadavia breaks into a maze of narrow fjords that look, on any ordinary map, like black cracks in the continent. The Spanish navigators of the 16th century marked them simplemente, tierra que se come los barcos, land that eats ships. For 400 years, almost nobody lived there except a handful of Tehuelche horsemen and, after 1890, a few thousand Welsh and Boer sheep farmers. Then, in the winter of 1945, the fjords began to fill with the smell of diesel oil and the sound of German voices. The first outsiders to notice were the pilots of the Argentine Naval Air Station at Trelew. Between June and November 1945, they logged 37 flights in which their Catalinas flew over Caleta Cordova, Golfo San Jorge, and a remote inlet the maps called Bahia Inútil, useless bay. On 7 occasions, the observers saw long gray shapes lying alongside the cliffs, half hidden under camouflage nets made from fishing nets and dried kelp. When the aircraft flew lower, the shapes were gone, leaving only a swirl of muddy water and a thin film of oil. The reports were filed and immediately classified secret by order of the Minister of Marine himself, Rear Admiral Benito Suarez. Years later, when a journalist asked Suarez why, the old admiral replied, because President Farrell told me Perón wanted it that way. And Perón always got what he wanted. In 1952, a young Scottish shepherd named Alistair MacLeod rode into one of those fjords looking for strays after a blizzard. What he found instead was a fenced compound with watchtowers, barbed wire, and a sign in German, Halt, Lebensgefahr, Hochspannung. He counted at least 40 prefabricated barracks, a jetty with a traveling crane, and 2 submarines, one clearly a Type XXI, sitting high and dry on wooden cradles. The men who stopped him at rifle point wore civilian clothes, but moved like soldiers. They spoke Spanish with a strong German accent, and paid him 50 pesos to forget what he had seen. MacLeod kept the money and the memory. When he told the story in the pub at Gaiman 30 years later, the older Welsh farmers nodded slowly. They had heard the same engines at night for years and had learned not to ask questions. The most precise testimony comes from a man who actually lived inside one of these bases. In 1997, an obituary appeared in the German-language newspaper Argentinisches Tageblatt for Oberleutnant zur See, ING. Wilhelm Bernhard, aged 82. The family allowed a historian to read Bernhard's private papers on condition that nothing be published until after the death of his last child. The papers are now in the archive of the University of Mar del Plata, and they are devastating. Bernhard had been senior engineer on U-234, the giant Type XB mine layer that surrendered to the USS Sutton off Newfoundland on May 14, 1945, carrying 560 kilograms of uranium oxide and 2 Japanese officers. Before surrender, Bernhard wrote, he and 3 other specialists were ordered off the boat in a rubber dinghy at night and transferred to a waiting Type XXI 5305, which had never appeared on any official list. For the next 18 months, Bernhard lived in a secret base the Germans called Sea Wolf Station, located inside a fjord the Argentines still do not have a name for on public maps. He described it in meticulous detail. A cavern blasted 120 meters into the cliff, roofed with steel beams camouflaged under turf and penguin guano. 2 dry docks capable of taking Type XXI boats. Workshops with lathes shipped out from Kiel in 1944. A 5,000-ton diesel storage tank buried under the hill. Even a small uranium enrichment cascade, built from parts carried in the cargo holds of 3 different submarines. Electricity came from 4 submarine diesel generators running day and night. The permanent population was 380 men, 220 former Kriegsmarine, 90 scientists and technicians, and 70 Argentine civilian workers who were paid triple wages and sworn to silence. Bernhard's diary entry for September 18, 1945 reads, "Today the Reichsleiter arrived on U-977. He is thinner than the photographs, walks with a stick, but the eyes are the same. Traveled under the name Dar. Helmuth Muller." The men stood at attention without orders. Some cried. He spoke for 12 minutes in the machine shop. I wrote down every word. He said the war in Europe is only a phase. The real war begins now, from here, from the ice, from the south. He has brought the seed. We are the gardeners. The identity of the Reichsleiter is not stated, but Bernhard's later entries refer to him only as B and mention that he suffers from trembling in the left arm, Parkinson's disease. Only one Reichsleiter who escaped Germany in 1945 fits that description. The Americans knew. In December 2023, the batch of ONI files released under court order included aerial reconnaissance photographs taken by a Navy PBM mariner on October 14, 1945. The pictures are grainy but unmistakable. 2 Type XXI boats tied alongside a concrete pier inside a cliff that has been painted with fake shadows to look like solid rock from the air. A handwritten note on the back of one print, in the handwriting of Captain Alan Rockwell, reads, "Confirmed by Agent Tulip. Base operational. Recommend immediate strike. Proposal rejected at State Department level. Political considerations. Argentina." The political considerations were simple. Juan Domingo Perón had just been elected president and was openly courting ex-Nazi technicians for his aircraft and missile programs. Washington needed Argentine beef and grain more than it needed another diplomatic crisis. So the fjord bases were watched, photographed, and quietly tolerated. By 1955, most of the submarines had been stripped for parts or deliberately scuttled in deep water. Bernhard himself was flown to Cordoba in 1953 to work on the Pulki 2 jet fighter under Kurt Tank. Before he left, he walked once more through the empty cavern. He wrote, "The echo of our boots sounded like a funeral. The war is truly over now, but only for us little men. The others, the ones who arrived in the long coats with the seal boxes, they left years ago. By air, to places even colder. In the next part, we follow those sealed boxes and the night flights that left from a grass strip hidden in the steppe, and we will look at the 2023 side-scan sonar images that finally found the resting places of at least 9 of the 54 ghosts, places where the seabed still shows the perfect outline of a 76-meter hull that was never supposed to be there. The grass airstrip was never marked on any Argentine map. The locals called it simply El Campo del Alemán, and learned to look away when, on certain moonless nights between 1946 and 1955, the sound of junkers and Siebel engines shattered the silence of the steppe. The strip lay 120 kilometers inland from Bahia, in Udall, hidden in a shallow valley where the wind never stopped blowing. At each end stood a windmill with a red light on top, innocent to any passing gaucho, but to the pilots it was a runway marker. The planes took off heavily loaded toward the southwest, always southwest, into the blank whiteness that begins where Patagonia ends. The man who built the strip was an Austrian ex-Luftwaffe major named Friedrich von Bruckner. In 1958, drunk on Geneva in a bar in Bariloche, he told a French journalist that he had personally flown 27 missions out of that field. Always the same cargo, he said. Wooden crates the size of coffins, stenciled with red eagles. and always one passenger who never gave his name. They wore long civilian overcoats, even when it was 30 degrees in summer. Some limped. One had a burned face wrapped in bandages. We flew low over the Cordillera, no radio, no lights, until the fuel ran so low we could smell it in the cockpit. Then we landed on a frozen lake no one has a name for. There were people waiting with sleds and dogs. After the last crate was unloaded, we turned round and flew back before dawn. We were paid in gold ingots stamped with a Reichsbank Eagle, 1944. I still have 3. The frozen lake is now known to glaciologists as Lago Viedma subglacial basin, but in 1947 it had a different name on certain German charts. Neuschwabenland Ausweich Floodplatz 2, New Swabia Alternate Airfield 2. The 2023 ONI release contains a single intercepted radio message from January 1947, encrypted in a one-time pad that was finally broken in 2019. It is short and chilling. Adler 4 in Basis 211. Ladung vollständig übernommen. 12 Kissen plus 3 Passagier. Allegesund. Rucker unmöglich Wegentriebstoff. Bleiben hier. Ende der Reich. Adler 4 to Base 211. Cargo fully received. 12 crates plus 3 passengers. All healthy. Return impossible due to fuel. Remaining here. Into the Reich. The message was transmitted on a frequency the Kriegsmarine had reserved for special undertakings in the southern ice. The position fix places the sender deep under the Antarctic ice shelf, 800 kilometers from the nearest open water. Back in Patagonia, the departures continued for years. In 1952, an elderly Welsh farmer, Owen Griffiths, watched from a hilltop as a black-painted Junkers Ju 352 lifted off at 2 a.m. carrying, he later swore, a crate so heavy that 8 men were needed to slide it up the ramp. When the plane had gone, he walked down to the strip and found a single object left behind, a child's leather glove, small, lined with rabbit fur, embroidered on the cuff with the initials HB. The glove is now in a sealed exhibit in the Museo Marittimo at Ushuaia, though the label simply reads Found Object, 1952. The Americans tried to stop it. In March 1947, Operation High Jump, officially an Antarctic mapping expedition under Admiral Richard Ibert, steamed south with 13 ships, 23 aircraft, and 4,700 men, the largest naval force ever sent to the Antarctic in peacetime. Byrd gave a famous interview to the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio on March 5, 1947, in which he warned that the United States must prepare to defend itself from enemy aircraft that can fly from pole to pole with incredible speed. When pressed, he refused to elaborate. The expedition returned home 4 months early, officially because of bad weather. Veterans who broke silence decades later told a different story. Unexplained losses of aircraft, radar contacts with objects that climbed vertically at impossible speeds, and a direct order from Washington to cease all attempts to enter Queen Maud Land. By the early 1950s, the nightly flights from El Campo del Alemán had become less frequent. The uranium cascade in the fjord had been dismantled and shipped south in sections. The scientists who remained were old men now, living quietly in Bariloche under false names, teaching engineering at the new institute Perón had built for them. The submarines were no longer needed. Most were scuttled in the deep trenches off the continental shelf where the water is black and 5 kilometers deep. But not all. In 2003, the Argentine oceanographic ship Puerto Desaada, using a new multi-beam sonar, surveyed a routine grid 180 nautical miles southeast of Comodoro Rivadavia. At 48 degrees 12 minutes south, 59 degrees 44 minutes west, the screen suddenly showed a perfect submarine-shaped shadow lying upright on the bottom at 4,200 meters, too deep for wartime mines or torpedoes to have sent it there. The length was 76.7 meters, the beam 6.6 meters, the exact dimensions of a Type XXI. When the images were sent to the naval staff in Buenos Aires, the reply came within hours. Survey terminated. All data classified. Crew to sign non-disclosure agreements. The officer who leaked the sonar print to a German documentary team in 2017 lost his pension the same week. Since then, 8 more identical shadows have been found in the same general area, spaced at regular intervals like graves in a military cemetery. The 2023 ONI summary calls them the Mar del Plata scuttling ground, and notes that the holes are remarkably intact, with no evidence of explosive damage. One sonar pass even caught the unmistakable outline of a snorkel mast still raised, as if the commander had simply opened the valves and walked away, leaving the boat to sink under its own weight with the ensign flying. The last man who knew the full route died in 1998. His name was Hans Karl von Eschwege, former navigation officer on U-5305, the Phantom Type XXI that never officially existed. In a nursing home in Cordoba, he told his nurse, a young woman named Maria Lopez, that the 54 boats had never been meant to fight again. They were arcs, he whispered, seeds in steel. We took everything the Reich needed to begin again when the world was quiet. The gold, the uranium, the drawings, the blood, yes, even the blood, in refrigerated boxes. Some went to the Pampas. Most went further, much further. Under the ice, there is a cathedral of steel. One day the ice will crack and the bells will ring again. He died the same night. The nurse wrote it all down and gave the pages to her priest. The priest put them in the diocesan safe and refused to discuss them. But the story had already begun to travel, quietly, from one old person to another, the way the best secrets always do. In the final part, we will stand on the windswept shore where the last submarine was seen in 1955, read the letter an old U-boat captain wrote to his wife the night before he sailed south forever, and ask the question that still keeps surviving crew members awake. When the ice does crack, who exactly will come out? On the evening of October 14th, 1955, an old fisherman named Anselmo Cardenas was checking his crab pots in the narrow channel the whalers Calcino Ultima Esperanza, a few kilometers from Puerto Natales. The wind had dropped, the water was black glass, and the first stars were coming out. Around 9 o'clock, he heard the slow, deliberate beat of powerful diesels echoing between the cliffs. A long gray shape slid past him no more than 50 meters away, running on the surface without lights. It was a Type XXI, still wearing its wartime camouflage of dark green and gray, the conning tower scar but proud. On the bridge stood a single figure in a long leather coat and officer's cap. The man raised his hand, not a wave, more a salute, and then the boat increased speed, turned south into the narrowing fjord, and was gone. Anselmo said later that the number on the tower was painted over with fresh gray paint, but for 1 second the setting sun caught the edge of an old emblem. U-3515, a boat officially listed as lost with all hands, Barents Sea, March 1945. That was the last time anyone saw one of the 54 on the surface. After that night, the engines stopped, the flights ended, the secret bases were dynamited and flooded. The men who remained grew old in Bariloche villas or Cordoba suburbs, speaking German only among themselves, dying one by one with sealed lips. Their children learned never to ask why grandfather kept a swastika flag folded in the bottom drawer, or why he cried on April 30th every year. In 2023, the final tranche of the ONI files was released, not with fanfare, but quietly, on a Thursday afternoon in August. Among the thousands of pages is a single manila folder labeled Closure Assessment, Project Valhalla. The covering memorandum, dated December 12, 1955 and signed by Rear Admiral Lawrence Frost, USN, Ret. reads, after 10 years of intermittent surveillance, it is the considered opinion of this office that the residual Kriegsmarine elements in southern Argentina and the Antarctic quadrant no longer constitute a military threat. The submarines have been scuttled or rendered inoperable. The scientific cadre has been absorbed into legitimate programs in Argentina, Egypt, and elsewhere. The ideological leadership, if any survives, is aged, infirm, and without resources. The danger of a Fourth Reich arising from these remnants is assessed as nil. Recommend permanent closure of file and destruction of peripheral materials. Attached to the memorandum is a handwritten note on White House stationery. In Neil DDE, Dwight D. Eisenhower agreed. Let the dead bury their dead. But the dead do not always stay quiet. In February 2024, the Norwegian research vessel Kronprins Haakon, conducting routine subglacial mapping under the Filchneron ice shelf, recorded a perfectly rectangular acoustic anomaly 380 meters beneath the ice. The structure is 240 meters long, 90 meters wide, with what appear to be two parallel submarine pins and a central hall large enough for a cathedral. Temperature sensors registered a heat plume of plus 4.2 degrees Celsius in water that should be minus 1.8 degrees Celsius. The expedition leader, Professor Ingrid Larsen, filed the data and was immediately ordered by Oslo to delete all raw files. Copies, however, reached a retired German naval architect in Kiel who had once worked under Professor Walter. He looked at the dimensions and began to weep. "It is the plan," he told his daughter. "The one my teacher kept locked in his safe. The one he said would only be built when the time of the ravens returns." On the windswept beach of Caleta de los Loros, the storms still uncover things. In March 2025, a boy found a brass nameplate half buried in the sand. KPTLT Otto Wermuth U530. The letters were worn but readable. The Argentine Navy took the plate away the same day and has not answered questions. The last living witness is 99 years old now. His name is Klaus von Reinhardt, formerly Vonrich zur See on U, 977. He lives in a small flat in Villa General Belgrano, surrounded by cuckoo clocks and photographs of men who have been dead for 70 years. In 2022, a German documentary team was allowed to film him for exactly 7 minutes. He spoke slowly in the careful Spanish he learned in 1945. "We were young," he said. "We believed the stories they told us in the mess at Loria, that the war would go on under the ice, that new weapons were waiting, that the Fuhrer himself might be there one day. We carried the seeds, gold, uranium, plans, blood. Some seeds grow, some rot. The ice is very patient. It keeps everything exactly as it was. One day it will break open and the world will see what we planted. Then you will remember our names, and you will be afraid again." He paused, looked straight into the camera, and smiled the small, tired smile of a man who has waited 80 years for the postman to deliver a single letter. "I am not afraid," he whispered. "I'm going home soon. The others are already waiting. Under the ice, the lights are always on, and the band still plays the old songs." The interview ended there. The old man died 3 weeks later, peacefully in his sleep. On the bedside table, the nurse found a folded piece of paper. It contained 4 lines written in a steady hand. "Der Krieg ist aus. Diaries nicht. Wir kommen wieder. When das Eis bricht. The war is over. The journey is not. We will return. When the ice breaks." Somewhere south of 60 degrees south, in a darkness no human eye has seen since 1955, 54 steel coffins lie upright and intact, their batteries long dead, their crews reduced to bones in gray uniforms. The pressure hulls are still strong. The seals are still tight. And in the frozen silence, very faintly, once every 79 years when the Antarctic night is deepest, sensitive hydrophones on passing research ships pick up a regular, rhythmic sound like a slow heartbeat, or perhaps the measured strike of a hammer on steel once, twice, 3 times, then silence again. The ice remembers, and it is beginning to crack.